Eh? Eh? Pretty close? Look, I wasn't gonna spend $1,000 on a replica Leon S. Kennedy jacket. Hey guys, welcome to the channel. My name's Shinobi Nando, and today I'm reviewing for you the Resident Evil 4 Remake. For those of you who are more of a regular to my channel, this is my first review in my new format, so I'll just go over quickly what I'm going to do here, and for newcomers, I'll explain how I review things. So very briefly, what I do now is I do the good, the bad, and then I have Nando's nitpicks where I go over things that really didn't affect the score for me, but kind of bugged me in some way that I really wanted to mention. I also won't be going over any spoilers to the new content in this game. However, seeing as Resident Evil 4 is nearly 20 years old, I might discuss a few things about the story overall, especially in relation to the original, as it's impossible not to compare a remake to its original. The story of Resident Evil 4 has been massively improved and is now more in line with the tone of the newer RE7 and Resident Evil Village games. For the most part, some of that goofy early 90s charm is definitely still there, and along with everyone's favorite bingo line.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
But a lot of that campiness or B-movie aesthetic has been removed, or toned down at least. Alongside the story, a lot of the side characters are vastly expanded upon and made to be a lot more three-dimensional. For example, Louise is no longer this clumsy, chauvinistic, often forgetful stereotype of a Spaniard. Instead of being a random lab technician that Sadler hires to help him with Las Plagas, he's now used as a bridge between Resident Evil 4 and the greater Resident Evil universe. He's now introduced as a former Umbrella scientist. This actually helps RE4 reconnect to the greater lore in general, rather than just being an amazing but overall isolated incident in the expanded universe. Hey, Editing Nando here. Firstly, just a quick spoiler warning, skip to the time on screen if you don't want to hear this. Okay, for those of you that are stuck around, I'm well aware that obviously there is ties to the greater Resident Evil narrative within the original Resident Evil 4. Obviously Umbrella is mentioned, there's Wesker, there's Ada, but you'll see what I mean a lot more when you play the game for yourselves and actually look at the files that you can obtain in game. This is much more connected to the overarching Umbrella plot. I think it makes a lot more sense to have had Louise as a former Umbrella scientist. Not only that, he was part of the European team, which obviously ties to the plot of Code Veronica as well. Anyways, back to the rest of the review. Ashley is by far the most improved character, no longer this whining, annoying inconvenience. She not only seems aged up, but she also seems more grown up overall as a character. Speaking of growing up, she grows from a simple damsel in distress to actually someone who actively helps Leon throughout the campaign, seeing herself more as a partner. She also no longer awkwardly just kind of develops feelings for her knight in shining armor. Through a bit of banter and conversations as you explore the various areas in Resident Evil 4, the two grow to genuinely bond with each other over the course of the game. Gameplay wise, she's also improved by a new system of ordering her to either stay at a distance or hide, allowing you to fight unhindered. Or alternatively, you can tell her to stay close to you and use that as a means to run past enemies or use stealth. Speaking of gameplay, RE4 on the RE engine is amazing. Unlike the rookie cop we're introduced to in Resident Evil 2, in Resident Evil 4, Leon was always supposed to be this highly trained individual with loads of options at his disposal. While the original game tried to accomplish this with its contextual commands and QuickTime events, being on newer hardware and also Capcom's amazing RE engine, which runs games like Monster Hunter Rise and Devil May Cry 5, means that the combat has never been better in a Resident Evil game. Just like in the original lore, Leon was highly trained in close quarters combat, especially with a knife, by Major Krauser. And this is represented in-game by how important the knife now is to combat. Normally just a last resort or perhaps a flex from veteran players doing a knife-only run, you now need it for stealth, breaking out or parrying some of the one-shot kills that mini-bosses and bosses can inflict on you, and parrying the villagers' attacks. Speaking of Krauser, he alongside the other villains have also been expanded upon. Elder Mendes, for example, has an entire backstory that can be explored by backtracking back to his cabin and reading all the new lore, and is now kind of more of a tragic character. And Sadler's featured much more in this game, and Krauser became my favorite villain of the game. Not only did they finally flesh out the relationship between Leon and Krauser, outside of obviously the rail shooter spin-off Dark Chronicles, to me at least, they made him feel like much more of a rival or the main villain for Leon. And his boss battles are probably some of the best in the game. While I don't want to go into too much detail, gone are the clunky QTE fights. You now have an active role, and if anything, his boss battles are much like a final exam for the game, meaning you really need to learn and master the new combat mechanics of the remake, especially, as you could probably guess, the new knife parrying system. Now, I don't have too much to say negatively, as overall, this game is insanely good. I found that most of my bad takeaways were actually nitpicks, but no game is perfect, not even Resident Evil 4. And my first problem was that, just as I feared as I was playing Village, in which this game borrows a lot of elements from, and yes, vice versa, Village did borrow a lot from Resident Evil 4, a lot of the horror has been removed from this game. Now, RE4 was always this stop point in this series between the transition of survival horror to action horror in the later games like Resident Evil 5 and 6. But with the remake, I was hoping that Capcom would inch this game slightly more towards the horror aspects, especially with the newer photorealistic graphics. While this game undoubtedly looks amazing and Las Plagas are as creepy and disgusting as ever, I was never scared. Well, you can argue this is a symptom of being a veteran of the series. RE2 and even parts of RE3 Remake to this day still scare me, or at least fill me with a sense of dread and tension. That brings me to the only other real problem I have with RE4. It's way too easy on normal. And I do appreciate the irony that the original game was the first one to introduce this mechanic, is due to the fact that killing enemies actually gives you more ammo, pesetas to buy and upgrade things, or crafting materials means that you have an overabundance of ammo at any given time. It sounds like such a simple thing, but it creates such a big problem. Unlike the other games where fighting an enemy is an expenditure of resources, you've essentially turned something that was supposed to scare me into something farmable. Meaning that I always went out of my way to clear out rooms and kill every enemy, not only because it was really easy with the new combat, because I didn't want to miss out on any resources. Even after boss battles, rarely did I have that feeling of getting through by the skin of my teeth, cautiously checking my weapons and trying to reload them, only to discover that I have no ammo and completely out of healing items. And thus gone is that feeling of anxiety necessary in this kind of setting of how am I going to make it through this next section with only 10 handgun bullets and red health. My case was constantly full. To quickly round off and emphasize this point, the new knife mechanics, while amazing, trivialize a lot of the enemies, even bosses. As I said before, you can parry attacks, you can stealth takedown, and while the devs try to counter this by the fact that the knife can break and by how low the durability, at least before you start upgrading them, because of course you can upgrade them, I often found that as soon as I killed an enemy with a knife, it would spawn another one upon death to replace the one I just used. Possibly the biggest offender though in the game is the new bolt gun. While amazing and such a cool concept and idea, it's essentially a crossbow that allows you to fire silent bolts at the enemy to further help you with stealth. The fact that you can retrieve bolts that you either missed or from enemies that you've killed, and let's not forget that with a few upgrades, this thing has incredible stopping power, means you can potentially use it and never run out of ammo. That's right, you get a gun early on that essentially has infinite ammo. Now again, these are points that, while they didn't do enough to reduce my overall score, or by much, nevertheless, I felt I should mention them, as they were typically silly or weird decisions that had me kind of scratching my head. The first few are more silly things that I kind of missed or wondering why they were even included, like the item box, a staple of the series. It has now been combined with the typewriter. Also adding to that difficulty issue I had is the fact that you can, at any given point in the game, send items to the typewriter, meaning that even if your case got full, you could just reshuffle things on the fly. And the complexity of item management is now gone from the series, as puzzle and key items are no longer included in your main inventory or take up any space. Although some of you might see that as a positive, which is why I included it in my nitpicks, it does remove some of the puzzles and horror elements that I was talking about before, as you now never need to backtrack or think about your loadout before you go into a new area. Now, another thing that Capcom worked really hard to do in this game is to tone down the thirst and the inappropriateness of the game. They did, however, include jiggle physics.
My money don't jiggle jiggle, it folds. I like to see you wiggle wiggle, for sure.
Like, someone has to program that in. That's not just a byproduct of the RE engine. It's a nitpick. You took away the lewd jokes and some of the other pervier moments of the game, but took the time to program jiggle physics. Last nitpick, I mentioned in my Village review that I could almost place money that we were getting a Resident Evil 4 remake before Code Veronica, as Village's mechanics and settings were eerily similar, and it does look at times like they really did reuse some of the assets from Village. A lot of the force or the village itself looks almost identical to some of the assets or locations, despite being in Spain rather than Eastern Europe. Let me make it clear that nothing is straight reused. I'm just saying you can tell a lot of the art assets were brought over to this game to obviously speed up and help with development. This is without a doubt the best Resident Evil game ever. The original was beloved, and this is a much better version of that. From the new graphics, which also include those seamless God of War transitions to cutscenes from gameplay, to the amazing gameplay changes and the smart decision to expand on the side characters and to connect the game more strongly to the overall Resident Evil universe, Resident Evil 4 gets a Platinum Shuriken on my scale, which is the highest award I can give it. It basically means go buy it now, 100% worth it at full price. Go back in time and pre-order it. Even if you're not into Resident Evil games, this game is amazing. You will love it, trust me. While it's not a 10 out of 10 for me like a lot of other outlets have been saying and YouTubers, I give it more like a 9.7, 9.5, and that's simply because this is quite possibly also one of the easiest Resident Evils I've ever played, especially for a regular of the series. Some of the bosses were so easy that I beat them with the most basic of weapons in like a minute on my first attempt, and also I was so overstocked on ammo for all but like 2 parts of the whole game. It took me a solid 12 hours to beat, and that's with doing every one of the new side missions you can get from the merchant and collecting roughly about 90% of all the treasures on the map. 2 things I wanted to quickly mention that I didn't let affect the score, just because based on the history of the other games and Capcom's habit of releasing free DLC, free story DLC later for most of the newer Resident Evils, is they did remove separate ways in Ada's missions, where you get to play as Ada and what she does in the background while Leon's searching for Ashley. Again, much like Not a Hero, that could be added possibly for free in the future once they've done developing it. But unlike the other remakes, a lot less was cut from this game and a lot more was added. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Are you going to pick up this game? Have you been excited for it? Have you played it already? Am I being a bit too harsh on the whole easy thing? Don't forget, if you haven't picked up the game and you are, please check out the link in my description to CD Keys, where you can pick up the game for about 30% off if you're going to get it digitally. That's both the regular and the deluxe edition. And subscribe if you want to see more reviews, more unboxings of my collector's editions, more skits, and my series What's in the Box, where I tell you what you can get where, how much it's going to cost you, and where can you pick it up the cheapest. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video. Should have cosplayed as the stranger. That would have been much easier than Leon. I'm not even blonde.